You are tired, but it's not the kind of tired sleep can cure. It's deeper than the body. It's an ache in the soul, a fatigue shaped by years of chasing things that never stayed, of trying to matter to people who only noticed when you disappeared. You've burned your energy in silence, in effort, in invisible wars of attention. And now, there's nothing left but the echo of your own unmet need. You've called it love. You've called it loyalty. But if you look closer, really look, it was always a transaction, an unspoken deal your mind tried to negotiate. If I give enough, they'll see me. If I stay, they'll choose me. But they didn't, and they won't, because no one respects desperation, even when it's disguised as devotion. That's the first cruelty of emotional attachment. It tricks you into believing your suffering is sacred, that your emotional investment makes you noble. But it doesn't. It makes you visible, predictable, controlled. You weren't loving, you were leaking, bleeding validation into people who fed off your longing and gave nothing back. This is where power dies, in the hunger to be seen. You didn't start here. Once you had boundaries, you had stillness, but something broke you open. Maybe it was neglect, maybe it was silence, maybe someone gave you just enough affection to awaken your hunger, then vanished. And from that moment, you've been starving. But you smiled, you stayed, you chased, because somewhere inside you, a voice whispered, you don't matter unless someone chooses you. That voice shaped your identity, and from then on, every emotional high, every gesture, every act of love was just a negotiation for proof. Proof that you were worthy, proof that you existed in someone else's world. But here's the truth, that isn't love, that's slavery. You've mistaken emotional obsession for connection. You've called anxiety passion. You've confused your trauma bond with loyalty. But that's where the illusion dies. Because when you need someone to choose you just to feel real, you've already lost yourself. This is the battlefield of the obsessed, not the dramatic, romanticized obsession movies sell you. No, this is the silent kind. The kind that looks like care but bleeds control. The kind where your identity is entangled in another's gaze, where your worth is held hostage by their validation. It's the obsession of waiting for a reply, overthinking a silence, performing your own devaluation in hopes of being remembered. You weren't weak. You were wired that way, conditioned to react, conditioned to please, taught to chase approval like oxygen and confuse availability with value. It's not your fault, but it is your responsibility now. Because the truth is brutal. The more you react, the more they know they own you. The more emotionally available you are, the more invisible you become. You think they'll notice your loyalty. But loyalty without distance is emotional background noise, and no one listens to what's always playing. You gave your best to those who didn't ask for it, and now you're empty, sitting in the ruins of your emotional generosity, wondering why they don't care, but they never needed to. You gave them everything before they earned anything. You've made your emotions a gift and your presence a guarantee, and they read it like this: you don't value yourself, so I don't need to either. It's a brutal mirror, but it's sacred, because inside this pain, something is awakening. A question, not why didn't they love me, but why did I need them to? This is the fracture point. The moment your mind begins to revolt against its own programming, the emotional exhaustion you feel, it's not a failure. It's the beginning of withdrawal, of detoxing from the illusion that your power lives in being loved. It doesn't. It lives in being sovereign, unbound, emotionally unbuyable. You don't need to be colder. You need to be cleaner. No more giving your attention away like it's nothing. No more chasing answers from people who thrive on your confusion. No more waiting to be seen. That waiting is the cage. That hunger is the leash. This is not about becoming numb. It's about becoming precise. You are not here to be chosen. You are here to choose. And the first choice is to no longer beg for the eyes that couldn't see you. You do not heal by proving your worth to the ones who couldn't hold it. You heal by realizing you never had to perform in the first place. So let it ache. Let the exhaustion hollow you out. Because in that emptiness, something is being cleared. The addiction to reciprocation, the disease of being liked, the need to explain yourself. Burn it all. Because the only version of you that survives what's coming is the one who no longer needs to be wanted. You've been told silence is weakness, that detachment is cold, that the absence of emotion is the absence of humanity. But that was a lie told by the ones who needed your emotions to manipulate you. See, the game has never been about love. It's always been about leverage. And the moment you stop reacting, you remove their control. Enter Machiavelli not as a villain, but as the mirror you were never shown. He didn't teach cruelty. He taught clarity. He saw the mind of man not through idealism, but through pattern, through instinct, through power. And in that mirror, something brutal was revealed. The emotionally detached man is the one who bends the world without touching it. He doesn't chase. He doesn't beg. He doesn't need to be loved to be followed. Why? Because he understands the fundamental principle of psychological warfare: distance creates gravity. The more you reveal, the more they can move you. But when you hold, when you observe, when you say nothing, you become unreadable. And what can't be read can't be controlled. This isn't apathy, it's strategy. You were raised to believe that expressing everything made you honest, that openness was strength. But openness without discernment is exposure. And in the mind of the manipulator, exposure is currency. You thought your vulnerability was bonding, but it was ammunition. Every time you explained yourself, defended your value, poured out your heart, you gave away the blueprint to your destruction. You taught them how to move you. But Machiavelli whispers a different code: appear as needed, reveal only what strengthens perception, control through image, influence through absence. This is the anatomy of control, and you can feel it now, can't you? The shift, the pull to reframe everything you've ever called connection. You begin to realize that not reacting is not avoidance, it's precision. That not explaining is not arrogance, it's protection. That emotional distance is not cruelty, it's self-command. There is nothing more powerful than the one who sees but does not speak, who feels but does not flinch, who watches but does not reach. Because that person has exited the field of influence. They are no longer food for the emotionally hungry. And here's the paradox: when you detach, they feel you more. When you speak less, they listen harder. When you move away, they follow closer. Why? Because in a world of constant noise, silence is a mystery, and mystery is magnetic. Machiavelli didn't need love to move the masses. He needed perception, control over how he was seen. He knew that distance makes the mind spiral, that a well-timed withdrawal plants more questions than any confession ever could. And that's what makes you unforgettable, not by force, not by availability, but by becoming the question they cannot answer. You must become a mirror that reflects nothing but their own hunger. And when they project onto you, when they try to decode your silence, interpret your absence, understand your distance, you win, because they are now trapped in a game you no longer play. That is the power of emotional detachment. It is not retreat, it is orchestration. You don't need to speak to be understood. You need to be ungraspable. Because once they believe, they can't read you, they can't predict you. And once they can't predict you, they fear you. And fear, subtle, psychological fear, is the first sign of respect. This is where the cold becomes divine. Not the cruelty of a heartless man, but the calm, regulated power of someone who has mastered the game. You are no longer here to win people. You are here to shape their reality. They will orbit you not because you forced them to, but because your detachment revealed their addiction to being noticed. You gave them nothing, and in that void, their obsession was born. Because silence isn't absence, it's authority. You don't need more words. You need more restraint. You don't need more reactions. You need more control. This is the doctrine of the observer, the school of the still mind, the empire of the emotionally unavailable. Not because you feel nothing, but because you have learned to feel precisely and never out loud. This is your turning point, where the ache of need becomes the elegance of indifference, where the man who once overgave becomes the man who watches and decides. You've studied their games. Now you become the one who writes the rules. You thought presence meant being loud, being seen, being the brightest light in the room, always turned on, always performing. But the more visible you made yourself, the more invisible you felt. People looked, but they didn't see. They responded, but they never felt you. You were available, and that availability drained you, because every glance you chased, every conversation you tried to hold together, every space you filled with effort, was a subtle betrayal of your own frequency. And maybe you didn't notice it at first, because approval is addictive. The illusion of being wanted is powerful until you realize it's not you they're drawn to. It's the access, the ease, the comfort of knowing they can have you. And when something is easy to have, it quietly becomes easy to forget. You weren't boring, you were everywhere, and everywhere becomes background. But then came the silence, the withdrawal, the retraction of your energy, and something changed, not in you, but in them. The same people who once overlooked you now scan every room hoping to feel you again. But you're no longer broadcasting. You're not available in the same way, and suddenly, you're all they can think about, not because you're louder, but because you're less. Because presence isn't volume, it's precision. It's the awareness that attention is a currency, and you were giving it away like it meant nothing. Now, you hold it back like it's gold. You move with restraint, and that restraint becomes gravity. You're not chasing connection anymore, and the absence becomes louder than your old performance ever was. This is the paradox. You become unforgettable by becoming unreachable. True presence isn't about being seen. It's about being felt without explanation. Your silence speaks in frequencies that words can't reach. Your stillness holds attention they can't define. And in a world flooded with noise, your quiet becomes a signal, a code, something rare enough to obsess over. Because what is rare is what shapes desire. You don't entertain anymore. You don't over-explain, justify, prove, or repeat. You're not performing intimacy. You're not offering access just because someone has eyes. And that refusal, that dignified refusal to pour out your energy for temporary recognition, makes people stop. It forces them to reconsider your presence. It bends their behavior in real time. This is how you weaponize presence, not through excess, but through absence. You remove yourself from spaces that once consumed you. You stop filling voids that were never yours to carry. You detach, not out of bitterness, but clarity, because you finally understand that constant availability is energetic death. And now, you're done dying for attention. Instead, you become the still point, the one who doesn't flinch, the one who doesn't reach first, the one who doesn't break their own silence just to ease the discomfort of others. Because silence isn't absence, it's authority. It says, I know my value doesn't shrink when I'm not explaining it. And that's power most people will never touch. You don't need to be liked. You don't need to be understood. You don't need to be known by everyone. You just need to be felt by the few who are sensitive enough to recognize weight. When it walks into a room and says nothing, presence without accessibility creates mystique. Mystique creates scarcity. Scarcity creates fixation, and fixation creates influence. But this only works when it's real. When you don't pretend to be detached, you actually are. When you don't fake indifference, you've transcended the game. You're not emotionally performing coldness. You've simply left the market where emotional begging was the currency. And in that stillness, in that unapologetic refusal to audition for connection, your power compounds. Because your energy is no longer reactive. It's selective. You're not everywhere. But when you arrive, even in silence, the room calibrates. They don't just hear you, they sense you. And it's that sensing, that almost unnerving awareness that someone is present but not accessible, that shakes people out of their autopilot. Now you exist like a rare signal, precise, subtle, and unforgettable. Because when everything screams, silence becomes sacred. And when everyone is chasing validation, stillness becomes a weapon. You no longer reach for recognition. You let recognition reach for you. And it always will, because the world will always want more of what it can't touch. This is presence without apology, power without noise, influence without movement. And once you realize that your most valuable energy is the energy you withhold, you stop trying to be everywhere. You start becoming legendary by being rare. And that's the real weapon, not that they want you, but that they can no longer have you. You were taught to stay, to fix, to explain. That if something felt off, you had to lean in, speak up, offer more of yourself until the connection stabilized. You were trained to believe that walking away meant giving up, that absence meant failure, that silence meant surrender. But that's where the illusion dies, because there comes a point when presence becomes cheap, when your nearness loses weight, and the only way to be heard is to disappear. Not as a tantrum, not as a game, but as a strategy. Withdrawal is not weakness. It's not escape. It's the reset button. It's the unspoken command that rewrites the entire dynamic. Because silence isn't passive, it's surgical. When you pull back, you're not vanishing. You're shifting gravity. You're changing the tempo of interaction in a way they can't control. And that's what they feel. Not your absence, but the collapse of the rhythm you once carried. They notice it in the stillness, in the missing call, in the space where your energy used to live. You were predictable. Now you're not. You were available. Now you're not. And the human mind, conditioned to take constants for granted, suddenly becomes haunted by the void you leave behind. That void becomes obsession, because people aren't addicted to noise. They're addicted to signals. And when your energy goes quiet, it becomes a signal too loud to ignore. They wonder where you went, why you're no longer reacting, why the pattern collapsed. And their mind, starved of the feedback it once fed on, begins to replay every interaction, trying to decode the shift. This is not punishment. This is psychological precision. You are not retreating to be petty. You're not ghosting to feel superior. You're stepping back to let distortion collapse, to see who comes toward you without force, to let the silence speak for you in ways words never could. Because absence has its own language, and those fluent in emotional manipulation hear it the loudest. When you were always present, they knew the rhythm. They could predict your reactions. They could play to your fears, your longing, your kindness. But now you're unreadable, and nothing disturbs control like unpredictability. This is why withdrawal works. It removes you as an object and replaces you with a question, a mystery, a tension. And tension is the birthplace of fixation. When you step back, the emotional field resets. You are no longer emotionally paying rent in spaces that don't value you. You stop trying to keep peace where war is the language. You no longer validate what exhausts you. And in that withdrawal, you reclaim authority. Not by begging, not by explaining, but by becoming scarce. Scarcity rewires desire. It activates a deeper part of the mind, the one that equates rarity with value and access with worth. And suddenly, your silence doesn't read as absence. It reads as importance. Not because you told them you mattered, but because the lack of you forces them to confront what they dismissed. When you were too easy to reach, the truth is, most people only realize what you were after you stop showing up for their comfort. And that's not cruelty, that's clarity. That's what happens when you remove the illusion of permanence. When you stop offering yourself like a habit and start becoming a choice they no longer have access to. But here's where the strategy sharpens. Withdrawal is only powerful when it's rooted in stability, not reaction. If you pull away in anger, they feel your resentment. If you vanish out of fear, they feel your insecurity. But when you withdraw from a place of quiet authority, when you pull your energy back like a sword sheathed in silence, they feel the edge. It's not about them missing you. It's about them noticing the silence and realizing it's intentional. That's what turns confusion into obsession. They don't know what you're thinking. They don't know what you're planning. They don't know if they still matter. And in that vacuum of clarity, their mind starts to spiral. Not because you've manipulated them, but because you've interrupted the addiction to your presence. And now they chase it, not you, your energy. The one they overlooked, doubted, minimized. Now it's the only thing echoing in their mind. Because silence, when used correctly, doesn't create distance. It creates pull. But withdrawal isn't about winning. It's about recalibrating. It's the move you make when you're done negotiating your value through noise, when you're done explaining what your absence already makes undeniable. You are not ignoring anyone. You are mastering your own tempo, and only those who respect it will be allowed back in. This is how you shift from emotionally reactive to energetically sovereign. You stop dancing to frequencies that diminish you. You stop speaking where you are not heard. You no longer dilute your power for those addicted to your availability. And in your retreat, your value crystallizes. This is not running away. This is rising above. Not louder, not closer, just rarer. You spent years waiting for the mirror to speak, for someone to see you and say, you are enough. You calibrated your words to be palatable. You adjusted your presence to be less threatening, more desirable, more chosen. You made yourself small in the hope that someone would reach into the silence and pull you into certainty. But no matter how many yeses you received, the ache remained, because the wound was never about being chosen. It was about needing to be dot, and that need was the leash dot. It wasn't love you were addicted to. It was the anticipation of being validated, the high of recognition, the thrill of being selected in a world that taught you to equate visibility with worth. But here's the truth you were never told: needing to be chosen is the fastest way to be controlled, because anything you chase owns you. Anything you idolize builds its throne inside your mind, and the more you seek love to fill you, the more hollow you become. You weren't weak, you were wired that way, conditioned to make worth external, taught to look out, arts for inward peace, trained to beg silently for affection, and then call it connection. But when your identity is built on being wanted, your power belongs to whoever wants you the least. And that's how you lost yourself, not in rejection, but in the quiet desperation to never be rejected again. But that's where it ends, because this isn't about closing your heart. It's about severing the addiction to being seen, not to hate love, but to become immune to its conditions, to no longer contort your spirit to fit the mold of what's desirable, to stop trading your authenticity for a place in someone else's fantasy. Detachment isn't bitterness, it's psychological sovereignty. And this is the internal throne. You rise not above people, but above the games that kept you small. You no longer hunger for attention, because your attention has value. You no longer seek validation, because your existence already affirms itself. You are not impressive, you are unshakable. You no longer flirt with approval, because you understand what it costs to need it. This is not arrogance, it's silence refined into self-possession. You cut the root, the craving to be chosen, and everything begins to shift. You no longer move based on how they see you. You no longer panic when you're misunderstood. You no longer shape yourself to be digestible, because you finally remembered nothing real requires your betrayal to be maintained. And that includes love. This is Machiavellian detachment, not coldness, but clarity. The ability to see affection as an offering, not a drug. To receive love not as salvation, but as an echo of what you already are. You do not chase obsession. You become it, not by performing, but by being the one thing they can't manufacture, someone who doesn't need them to exist. You are not hard to love. You are just no longer accessible to those who feed on your insecurity, because you've realized needing to be chosen is the final prison, the invisible chain that keeps your power outsourced. Every time you asked, "Do I matter to you?" you handed them the sword. But now the question dissolves, because your worth is no longer a vote. It's a fact, and facts don't beg. This is when the world begins to notice, when your silence becomes weight, when your absence feels heavier than your presence ever did, because you are no longer seeking a seat at their table. You are sitting on your own throne, building your own kingdom, lit from within, not louder, not bigger, just immovable. That's the paradox. The less you need to be wanted, the more magnetic you become, because people are not drawn to desperation. They're pulled toward poise, toward mystery, toward the ones who do not flinch when left alone. And now you are that, not as a performance, but as a baseline. You are not resisting connection. You are no longer enslaved by it. There is a moment when the craving dies, and in its place, there's silence, a silence that feels like peace, not absence, like presence, not loneliness. And in that silence, you sit, not on display, not on edge, but on the throne that was always yours, your mind undisturbed, your energy intact, your worth unquestioned. From here, you are untouchable. They can want you, they can miss you, they can fantasize about who you were when you were still performing for their affection, but you won't flinch, because now you don't need to be loved to feel whole. You don't need to be picked to feel powerful. You don't need to be seen to exist. You've cut the root. The game ends here. Now that you've withdrawn from the hunger to be chosen, everything begins to open. The fog lifts. The compulsive grasping fades. What's left is clarity, and with it, control. Not over people, over presence, over tempo, over energy. Because now you see it clearly. Power was never about speaking the loudest. It was about who could stay emotionally still while others reached. The moment you detached from the need to win, you became untouchable. And from that stillness, you learned the real game. Influence is not about pressure, it's about gravity. You don't move first, you don't explain, you don't react, you let silence stretch into tension, and tension stretch into anticipation. You create space, you control the tempo, because whoever controls the tempo controls perception, and perception is influence. You begin to pace the room emotionally without moving an inch. One moment, you radiate warmth. The next, you retreat into calm coldness, not to confuse them, but to reveal their need for certainty, to expose the way they reach for you when you lean back. This isn't manipulation. This is orchestration. The game was never about being liked. It was about becoming. The axis of emotional gravity. When you remove the need to be understood, you become unreadable. And unreadable is powerful, because most people broadcast their inner world with desperation. But you move like a contradiction. Intense but still, available but untouched. Your very presence forces others to interpret, imagine, obsess. And in their effort to decode you, they become entangled. This is the paradox of presence. The more ambiguity you carry, the more projection you generate. People don't fall for what they fully understand. They fall into the spaces they cannot define. You are not withholding affection. You are shaping its weight. You give just enough, then disappear. Let it echo. You become a rhythm they cannot map. This is emotional pacing, giving warmth, then silence, attention, then distance, not out of malice, out of mastery, because emotional predictability breeds boredom. But you have severed the need to be predictable. You've escaped the binary of approval and rejection. Now you exist in a third state, strategic ambiguity, and that ambiguity is magnetic. You no longer clarify your intentions. You no longer fill every silence. You no longer overexpress, because you know, the more you reveal, the less they feel. Emotion isn't volume, it's contrast, it's timing. It's withholding just enough to let imagination do the rest. This is not detachment as absence. It's detachment as design. You see, control doesn't come from clinging. It comes from composure, from the ability to enter a room and not need a single reaction to validate your presence, to smile and mean it, but not be bound by the response, to give without fear of not receiving. Because now you give from power, not from lack. You don't offer affection to be chosen. You offer it to shape the environment, like a conductor guiding the mood. A single look can shift the entire emotional climate, not because of intensity, but because of restraint. Because now your energy is no longer bleeding into every space. It's precise, intentional. You are not cold. You are calibrated. Every interaction becomes an echo chamber. People begin to reflect the emotional pace you set. You slow your breath, and the room mirrors it. You speak less, and their words multiply. You create space, and they try to fill it. You pull away, and they lean forward. This is influence without attachment. You no longer chase outcomes. You control atmospheres. The people who used to take your silence as absence now feel it as pressure. The ones who used to provoke you now notice the lack of response. And that lack becomes the loudest part of the conversation. You're no longer proving your worth. You're letting them realize it on their own. Because power doesn't demand attention. It commands awareness. You walk through life now as a slow-burning paradox. Warm enough to be wanted, distant enough to be unforgettable. Present enough to be real, untethered enough to be free. You do not play hot and cold to manipulate emotions. You play it to expose patterns, to mirror desire back to the one who feels it. And all the while, you remain untouched. This is the death of reactive identity. You're not performing roles. You're not seeking confirmation. You are setting the frame. You are the silent center around which others orbit. And the more centered you become, the more unstable their projections grow. Because you're not there to be decoded. You're there to be experienced, moment by moment. Without offering certainty, you influence without being defined. That's the highest level of control. Not dominance, but detachment. Not force, but frequency. You no longer enter rooms trying to win. You enter with the quiet knowing that your restraint is already reshaping the dynamics. Not by saying more, but by needing less. You don't need closure. You don't need explanation. You don't even need to be understood. You've become the variable they can't calculate, the tension they can't name, the mystery they return to when noise fails. Because now, you don't chase the game. You are the game. You walk now with a weight that isn't visible but impossible to ignore. It's a stillness carved from all the storms you refuse to bend to, a presence forged in cold fire. This is no longer about wanting or needing. This is about becoming an unshakable force, a living monument to detachment and dominion. You are no longer a player chasing after echoes. You are the silence that commands the echo. The crown you wear is not gold, not jewels, but ice clear, hard, and unyielding. It's the frost that settles on desire, crystallizing every impulse into something refined, something eternal. This crown is not a burden. It is a shield, a throne, and a warning all at once. It says, without words, that you are not here to be conquered. You are here to conquer your own space, your own mind, your own fate. You don't move to fill a void. You move because you occupy a realm others cannot enter. They reach, but you remain distant. They lean in, but you do not flinch. Their pull, once magnetic, now passes through you like a ghost's whisper. You exist beyond the realm of possession, beyond the desperate grasp of longing. To own you is to touch air. To bind you is to cage the wind. This is the apex of your transformation. Where before why? But we're learning to hold silence. Now you embody it. Not as absence, but as presence perfected. The silence you carry is not empty, it is alive. It burns beneath the surface, a quiet inferno that shapes everything around it without effort, without need. You are the paradox of warmth sealed in ice, a fire contained but never extinguished. Others may chase shadows, but you move in light sculpted by your own design. You don't seek approval, for your value is not measured by their eyes. You don't plead for attention, for your existence demands it without asking. You are the rarest frequency, the cold star in a sky of noise, burning with a glow that both fascinates and forbids, and they notice. How could they not? The world around you shifts when you enter. Conversations pause. Minds scramble to locate the source of this calm dominance. You are the question they cannot answer, the silence louder than any shout. You are the unseen force pulling at the edges of their focus, the obsession they never dared to own. They try to decipher you, to hold you, to claim you, but the harder they try, the more elusive you become. You are not a prize to be won, not a puzzle to be solved. You are a presence that transcends their need for control. You walk alone because you no longer depend on their company to validate your existence. You stand because you are already whole, and that wholeness radiates cold and perfect. Every step you take is a statement, not of aggression, but of absolute sovereignty. You don't apologize for your space. You don't explain your silence. You don't soften your edges. Instead, you sharpen them, carving a path through the noise that no one else can follow. In your wake, a trail of fascination lingers. People feel it even if they cannot name it, the magnetic pull of someone who refuses to be owned, who commands attention without surrendering their essence. This is not arrogance. It is self-possession elevated to an art form, a dance of power and peace intertwined. You become the embodiment of detachment's true power, not numbness, but clarity, not withdrawal, but invitation, not coldness, but refined fire. The flame that burns quietly beneath ice, unstoppable and eternal. This crown of ice you wear is also a mirror. It reflects the futility of chasing what was never yours to begin with. The need to be chosen, to be validated, to be loved. These are chains that once bound you. Now they shatter beneath your feet, leaving only freedom. Freedom to be whole on your own terms. Freedom to pull others into your orbit without losing yourself. Freedom to walk through life untouched, unbent, and unbreakable. You are no longer at the mercy of others' desires or fears. You have severed the cords of need that once tied you to external approval. Now, your power comes from within, a quiet, impenetrable source that never wavers, never weakens. They will never own you, not because you deny them, but because you have outgrown their reach. You are the storm and the calm, the question and the answer, the silence that screams louder than any presence, and they will never forget you. Not because you shouted the loudest or fought the hardest, but because you walked alone with a crown of ice, untouchable, unforgettable, unstoppable. This is your Coronation. Not with fanfare or noise, but with the deep, sovereign silence of one who has mastered the game. You have become the obsession without the obsession, the force that pulls without reaching, the presence that burns without needing to be seen. And in that, you find the highest freedom, the freedom of self-mastery. The freedom of absolute power, the freedom of the crown of ice.